Last fly of our tying session, the Gurgler, or a variation of Jack's Gurgler. But we've got our short shank, what is this, a Firehole 801P. And we're gonna start just by, it's like every other fly, starting our thread, moving it back to where we're gonna tie in our first material. And that's going to be right where the barb would normally be. And our first material is support for our tail feathers. So we're going to tie in a little clump of bucktail. So we're going to clip that off the tail, the hide there. We're going to pull all the fluffy bits out. I pinched it right about in the halfway point. Pull all the fluff out. I'm going to measure this about 2 shank lengths long. And so I'm going to transfer that. I don't want to have to tie all this fluffy stuff in, the extras. So I'm going to cut it close. Capture that with 2 or 3 wraps. I'm going to push it down around the hook shank. Just a little bit, just by pushing down with my thumb and then pinching on the sides. And then I'm really going to tie this in tight. We don't want it going anywhere. We just want a little bit of flare, not a lot, just a little bit. And now it's time for our saddle hackles. We're doing white over chartreuse, or excuse me, chartreuse over white. And I'm going to measure this a little bit longer than my bucktail. So I'm gonna hold that right where I want to tie it in, and I'm gonna cut the butts off here to make it easier to tie in. I'm gonna set this right here on the side, maybe. And remember, these will roll on you. So I'm actually going to set it more on the top so that when I tighten down, it doesn't roll sideways. I want it nice and flat this way. I don't want it to roll and be flat like that. So I'm going to set it, again, more on the top of the hook shank. This part of the stem I'm using is not hollow. I can't crush it. So that's what I'm going to do instead. So I'm going to measure this one out so it's the same length. I'm going to measure it. I'm going to cut it right where the bucktail butts end. I don't know if that'll show up on camera, but that way I know it's easy to line up. I just have to line up the butt of the feather and the bucktail butts. Pinch that there. A couple loose wraps, then really get some tension on it. Now I can tie in our flat wing, which is going to go flat. That's going to be our barred chartreuse. Measure this out. I want it just a touch longer than our white ones, maybe 1/4 of an inch. All right. So this part of the feather is flat. Just to help it along, I'm going to squish it in the back side of my scissors here. Lay this guy right on top. Tie it down. Make sure it stayed where I wanted it. Gather those little stragglers, and now I can tie in our foam. So I've already cut my foam at a little bit of an angle, and then I cut the corners off here just to aid in the tie-in process. So I'm going to turn my vise here so you can see what I'm doing, and basically I'm going to set this down right on top, and I'm going to pinch it. I'm going to do a loose wrap, another loose wrap, and then every wrap after that I'm going to move forward with a lot of pressure, and then I'm going to move back again with a lot of pressure, because this foam is going to want to roll on you. And then I'm just going to tie it back, advance my thread rearwards till I cover up all the thread I put down putting on the tails. Again, always making sure that my foam is on top. So I'm just going to come in and try to cover that up a little bit. And then I'm going to draw out about 4.5, 5 inches worth of thread, and I'm going to create a dubbing loop. So I'm going to pull my thread out, grab it around my finger, come back to the hook shank, go around it twice, then I'm going to take my bobbin and I'm going to pass it over my loop twice. And what that does, once I capture, it closes off the loop. I noticed, I think Monday, some people were having materials fall out of the loop when you spin it, and if you don't close it off, that's what'll happen. Your materials will fall out the top, they'll all get squished and pulled up to the front. So we don't want that. So now that I have my loop made, I'm just going to advance my thread up to the eye of the hook, and I'm just going to put a little half hitch in just to make sure I don't unwind anything, because I'm probably going to have to use rotary feature. With the camera right here, I have limited space. So for the body, we're going to use a pearl ice dub, and again, we're going to take quite a bit of it. I'm just going to show you here. I already have what I'm going to use off to the side, but we're going to straighten all these fibers. We want them all going in the same direction. So I'm just going to pinch and then lightly pull all the loose ones out. I'm going to do that, until all these fibers are going in the same direction. We don't want them to really catch on each other, and if you can see that, they're mostly going in the right direction. So the tricky part now is getting it into the dubbing loop, and the easiest way that I've found to do it is to try and grab everything in your fingers like so. I picked it up, I lay it down on a piece of paper so that I can pick the paper up and grab it with my fingers. So I'm just going to spread this open and slide everything in there. I'm going to hold it tight so that nothing slides out of it. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to spread everything out. It gets kind of bunched up in your fingers. But I'm going to use about 4 inches, 3.5, 4 inches worth of the loop here. So as you can see, again, trying to keep all these fibers going in the same direction, perpendicular to your loop. And now I'm going to pull tight, and I'm going to start spinning. And some of these are going to get bound down, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'm going to spin a couple more times. You'll notice your thread starts to shrink. Your dubbing loop tool pulls closer to the hook eye, and that's a good cue of when to stop. So now that I've lightly captured everything, I'm going to come in with my dubbing needle. You can use a brush. You can use, a dog slicker brush, works really well. I find most of this is just lightly wrapped around. You don't have to go that crazy. But we want to pick out as much as possible. We want this to be nice and have a thin core. So bear with me while I pick this out. All right, that. So now we're going to take this, and I like to pull everything off to the rear of the fly, just to help me see what's going on, because this stuff's pretty crazy. I'm going to start wrapping this, and I'm just going to, every turn I'm going to pull back on the material. Because the camera's in the way, I'm going to use my rotary. But without a rotary feature, you'd still be doing the same thing. You'd just pass your, your dubbing loop tool all the way underneath. But you're going to pull this material back every time. And we're not going to use, or we are going to use the whole loop, so you got to kind of judge your spacing. And if you get too close to the eye, sometimes you can push everything back. And I'm just going to unwind a few of these. Again, every now and then, if you are using your rotary, if you don't use your bobbin rest, you will have to unwind a few wraps, but that is okay. So now I'm just going to capture that. Hold everything back. Got a few really good, nice, tight wraps in there. Tie everything off. Now we're going to cut my loop away so we can do some more picking out of materials. This doesn't take very long, unlike picking out the actual loop. The key though, if you don't pick out your loop and you have stuff trapped down, it's not going to be that full. And the whole point of this loop is to kind of make the front portion of a minnow, the way it's tied in this style. So we're creating kind of a silhouette. We want a little bit more bulk up here in this front third of the fly. So once you get it picked out to your liking, you're going to split this down the middle, like so. And then you want to be careful. So we're going to pull it all back. And that hook is very sharp. So now you could just pull it straight forward like that, but I like to give it a little hump back here because well, that's how I've seen it tied. That's how I was told to tie it. But it also gives off a little bit more of a bubble line or a bubble trail when you fish it. So again, I'm going to tie this foam down. I'm going to make sure that it's on top of the hook and not rolling off to the side. Get a couple nice tight wraps in there. I'm then going to fold it back, and I'm going to put some thread under there, kind of pushing that foam back so that it makes more of a hood and it doesn't close off that eye. Again, the water is going to help with that too. But so once I get that where I want it, I can do a whip finish. Make sure that that's nice and tight. Clip our thread. There we go. And at this point, if you want to, you can trim a little bit, but I don't think it's necessary. But that is our chartreuse over white gurgler. All right.